What's a secret you will take to the grave, but don't mind telling on the internet? My mother is cheating on my father, and my father is cheating on my mother. They both know that I know this, but made me promise not to tell the other parent. Parents are crazy sometimes. So my grandfather had a hand in making one of the World Series trophies back in the day. He never got any credit, but we have photos and parts from his prototype. When I was a teen, I added what I knew to Wikipedia, since why not? Although I believe it's gone now, but funny story, I ended up being quoted in newspapers all over the country. Proceed to a few years later, I get a call from my mom, who's almost in tears of joy. She found that Wikipedia page and was freaking out. She was so happy that he finally got credit. She ended up making really fancy shadow boxes of the Wikipedia page, printed out, copies of the photos and other baseball stuff, and she made one for each of her siblings. I've had to just bite my tongue every time I go over there and see this thing hanging prominently in the living room. So I'm a little confused by this story. What was the big secret that this person has to keep to themselves? Obviously, the mother knows about their grandfather's involvement, and she has no problem sharing it all over her house. So I feel like there's more to the story here. Maybe the grandchild knows something here. What do you guys think? Is it just because he's trying to keep it a secret that he wrote the Wikipedia page, or something else? My first car accident back in high school was not because I swerved to miss a deer like I told my dad and the police. I actually tried to pull the emergency brake and do a 180 while going 50 miles per hour downhill. Had I gone off the other side of the road, I would have gone down a 50-foot hill and into the river. That was the last time I ever tried anything like that. There just so happened to be deer tracks in the mud near the ditch where I ended up, so I avoided a ticket and my dad paid to fix my car. I have never told him the truth in the 15+ years since. Seems like a good time as any to tell this story. When I was a teenager, my parents were divorced yet lived within walking distance of each other, so I oftentimes walk back and forth between their homes for whatever reason. I got to know a family that lived in the house on the corner of the block that my mother lived on. So one day I was passing this house and I noticed a wallet on the ground. I picked it up and opened the wallet, and I noticed the address on the ID was the house on the corner, and it was the mom of the family, a very nice lady. Me, being a teenager, took all the money out of the wallet, which was about $50, and I then went back to the home and returned the wallet, explaining I found it down the street. The mother was very relieved and grateful. What always weighed on me is a few weeks later, I passed a corner house, as I often did, and the lady stopped me. She wanted to thank me for returning the wallet and then handed me a $50 bill. I tried to refuse it, but she insisted. So, I was rewarded for stealing. While it's not a big secret, it is something I always think about for some reason. I've never really had the heart to tell anyone this story. Well, that is definitely a weight on the old conscience. Life has a way of teaching us some important lessons, and it certainly had an effect on this person, I think. I would bet that this person never took money again in their life. And if they really wanted to clear their conscience, I wonder if they could track that family down and return $100 plus the earned interest. The family would probably be a little confused at first, but might think it's a cool gesture. This is something I should have told my best friend, but I don't have the heart to tell him this. An hour before his girlfriend died in a car accident, I saw her at my job making out with the captain of the track team, his cousin. It's been 8 years, but I can't do that to him. He was going to propose to her that day. I sharted on a New Year's party bus a few years ago. I thought it was just a fart, but it was a small shotgun blast of fluid. I stayed calm, threw away my undies at the next bar, and luckily, there was little or no crap on the inside of my jeans, and I was able to continue the night with no one aware of my poop crime. I had a sweet, wonderful student who had been in foster care, but his mom worked her butt off to get him back, and she did. He had to take a very important state exam, and she called me and asked if he had passed it. I looked at the grades and saw that he did, and said that to her. She burst into tears of joy, and that is when I saw that I had read the wrong score. He had failed. So, I changed his grade to passing, and no one knew. That was the only time I ever did that. That could have cost me my license. The weird thing is, when my awful, corrupt principal pressured me to change other students' scores so we could raise our pass rate, I would refuse. I never told anyone what I did for my student. He later went into the military, was extremely successful there, has a great wife and kids, so I think I did the right thing. F those tests. They aren't human. This story is a good reminder that sometimes in life there are rules, And then there is common sense and common decency. I hope this teacher does not have any guilt about the situation because they definitely made the right decision by going with their heart. The foster care program can be brutal and have forever lasting effects on youth. So sometimes the best thing to do can be support them so they can escape and make their own life. When I was little, my parents would take my brother and me Christmas shopping for an angel every year. I'm sure that one of the years I was in first grade, and the angel we bought for was one of my classmates. So after Christmas break, when everyone was sharing stories about presents, she described literally everything she had bought, and I kept my mouth shut, but I knew. When I was a kid, another kid in my neighborhood shot me with an airsoft gun on purpose, even though I wasn't even playing with them. So a bit later, I wrapped an airsoft pellet in tinfoil and shot the kid in the eye. He didn't know I did it, and nobody else does either. His eye is permanently damaged, and I believe it's completely blinded to this day. Probably that I lost my virginity to a girl that I really liked, but she was in on that weird kind of half relationship, like they're not technically dating and not, say, boyfriend or girlfriend, but are infatuated with one another, with my cousin, who is in my inner circle of friends. So I still act like I'm a virgin in front of all of them, and only her and her roommate and I know the truth. Her roommate is also in my friend circle. I honestly don't even really care about the dirty, just kind of wanted to get over with it and also really liked her at the time. Everyone had said I think differently about doing it after having it, but I really don't. Like, I still would rather not sleep with someone unless I actually have some sort of emotional investment in them, unlike some rando who just wants to hook up with me. So I get that this guy is still a virgin and keeping this to himself, but what is the harm in people knowing later on that you've lost your virginity? I think it would be safer to share with them even the who and maybe the when. But on the other hand, I don't think there's anything wrong with the philosophy that it is nobody's business but your own. In the comments, what are your opinions about hookups and one-night stands versus having an emotional connection instead? Many years ago, an ex-girlfriend of mine got so wasted at a bar on Halloween that she passed out and peed all over the seat. Everyone saw, and it was everywhere. She didn't know anyone at the bar, thankfully, but she woke up the next morning and had no memory of it happening. She had told me how much fun she had. I decided to keep that one to myself. She would have just been mortified. When I was an awkward tween, my brothers and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. We had been raised by my grandparents since we were little kids, and even after my dad remarried, he and my stepmom both worked graveyard shifts, so we would spend the night at my grandparents' house while parents were at work. One day, my grandmother informed me that it was my grandfather's birthday and suggested that I wish him a happy birthday. So he was downstairs in the living room sitting on a sofa, and I went up to him and gave him a big hug around the neck and said, "Happy birthday, Grandpa." It was kind of difficult to hug a person sitting down, so I ended up kneeling on the sofa between his legs rather than trying to hug him from a standing position. He was quite happy and gave me a hug back. When I pulled back from the hug, he held me in his arms and gave me a big smile. And then he put his tongue in my mouth. Sometimes, when I was a little kid, we would kiss other family members on the mouth, but those were just pecks on the lips. I could tell immediately that this was different. His tongue was on my teeth. It lasted only for a moment, and I was grossed out and confused when I pulled away. At that moment, my grandmother walked into the living room, so I turned my head to look at her. My hands were still on my grandpa's shoulders. She seemed very happy that I had wished my grandfather a happy birthday like a good little kid. I gave him a final quick hug and scrammed out of the room. For the rest of my tween and teen years, I was always careful not to be alone in the same room with my grandfather. He passed away during my 20s, a good decade ahead of his time due to lifestyle-induced health issues, and my family chose me to speak at his funeral. Now, I had really complicated feelings about it because I did love him. My grandmother and grandpa raised me after all, and also my grandfather was the rock of the family. And after he passed away, the three branches, my dad and our family, plus his siblings and their families, gradually grew apart, and nothing was ever the same between us again. We didn't even spend Christmas all together anymore. I've never told anyone in my family about it because I couldn't break my grandmother's heart. She survived her husband 10 years and still talks to and about him every day and visits his grave multiple times a week. So, thanks for listening to my story, Reddit. Nice to get that off my chest. Now, first of all, I'm really sorry that they were put in this position and had this happen to him. I'm sure that was a frustrating, scary, and confusing thing to go through. especially with the kind of special relationship they had with their grandparents. Most definitely a tough choice for this person to make, to keep all of this to themselves, because they are probably right that it would be just devastating to their grandmother and might be too much to bear at an old age. I would also hope that this person could at least confide in someone in their family or close circle if they need to talk. That story is a lot to unpack, and it's unhealthy to keep it all bottled up. But hey, at least there is Reddit, I guess.